Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's online worship service. I'm Reverend Jennifer Nordstrom, and I'm honored to serve the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee as their senior minister. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome all you're carrying with you today and all your heart longs to set down. We'd like to pay a special welcome to guests joining us today. If you're visiting us for the first time or joining us from afar today, why don't you say hello in the chat and tell us where you're joining us from. I welcome everyone into our worship service by inviting you to repeat our mission statement after me. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. Our opening words this morning are the poem The Big Heart by Anne Sexton. She starts with this quote from W.B. Yeats. Too many things are occurring for even a big heart to hold. And this is Sexton. Big heart, wide as a watermelon, but wise as birth. There's so much abundance in the people I have. Max, Lois, Joe, Louise, Joan, Marie, Dawn, Arlene, Father Dunn, and all in their short lives give to me repeatedly in the way the sea places its many fingers on the shore again and again. And they know me. They help me unravel. They listen with ears made of conch shells, and they speak back with the wine of the best region. They are my staff. They comfort me. They hear how the artery of my soul has been severed, and soul is spurting out on them, bleeding on them, messing up their clothes, dirtying their shoes. And God is filling me. Though there are times of doubt as hollow as the Grand Canyon still, God is filling me. God is giving me the thoughts of dogs, the spider in its intricate web, the sun in all its amazement, and a slain ram that is the glory, the mystery of great cost, and my heart, which is very big. I promise it is very large, a monster of sorts, takes it all in. All in comes the fury of love. Let's go now to our beloved sanctuary to light the chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism.
I'm Reverend Kimberly, your Minister of Religious Education. The story I have for you today is called Chester's Way, and it's by a Wisconsin author who was raised in Racine, Kevin Hankes. Chester had his own way of doing things. He always cut his sandwiches diagonally. He always got out of bed on the same side, and he never left the house without double knotting his shoes. Chester always had the same thing for breakfast, toast with jam and peanut butter, and he always carried a miniature first aid kit in his back pocket, just in case. You definitely have a mind of your own, said Chester's mother. That's one way to put it, said Chester's father. Chester's best friend was Wilson, and Wilson was exactly the same way, and that's why they were best friends. Chester wouldn't play baseball unless Wilson played, and they never swung at the first pitch or slid head first. Wilson wouldn't ride his bike unless Chester wanted to, and they always used hand signals. If Chester was hungry, Wilson was too, but they rarely ate between meals. Some days I just can't tell those two apart, said Wilson's mother. Me either, said Wilson's father. Chester and Wilson, Wilson and Chester, that's just the way it was. They loved to go on picnics. Once, when Wilson accidentally swallowed a watermelon seed and cried because he was afraid a watermelon plant would grow inside him, Chester swallowed one too. Don't worry, said Chester. Now, if you grow a watermelon plant, I'll grow one too. Chester duplicated his Christmas list every year and gave a copy to Wilson because they always wanted the same things. And for Halloween, they dressed as things that went together: salt and pepper shakers, 2 mittens on a string, ham and eggs. They really are 2 peas in a pod, said Chester's mother. Looks like it, said Chester's father. In spring, Chester and Wilson shared the same umbrella. In winter, they never threw snowballs at each other. In fall, they raked leaves together. And in the summer, they reminded each other to wear sunscreen so they wouldn't burn. Chester and Wilson, Wilson and Chester, that's the way it was. And then Lily moved into the neighborhood. Lily had her own way of doing things. She wore Band-Aids all over her arms and legs to look brave. She talked backwards to herself sometimes so no one would know what she was saying. And she never left the house without one of her nifty disguises. Lily waved at all the cars that passed by, even if she didn't know who was in them. And she always carried a loaded squirt gun in her back pocket, just in case. She definitely has a mind of her own, said Chester. That's one way to put it, said Wilson. When Lily asked Chester and Wilson to play, they said they were busy. When she called them up on the phone, they disguised their voices and pretended they weren't home. If Lily walked on the side of the street, Chester and Wilson crossed to the other and hid. She's something else, said Chester. Looks like it, said Wilson. One day, while Chester and Wilson were practicing their hand signals, some older boys rode up, popping wheelies. They circled Chester and Wilson and yelled personal remarks. Chester and Wilson didn't know what to do. Just when they were about to give up hope, a fierce-looking cat with horrible fangs jumped out of the bushes and frightened the older boys away. Are you who I think you are? Chester asked the cat. Of course, the cat replied. Thank you, Lily, said Chester. You're welcome, Chester. Thank you, Lily, said Wilson. You're welcome, Wilson. I'm glad you were wearing a disguise. I'm glad you had your squirt gun. I always do, said Lily, just in case. Afterward, Chester invited Lily over for lunch. You have a Muscle Mouse cup? Of course, said Chester. I do too, said Lily. Same here, said Wilson. Chester and Wilson cut their sandwiches diagonally. Lily asked Chester's mother if she had a cookie cutter, and she made stars and flowers and bells. That's neat, said Chester. Wow, said Wilson. That night, Lily invited Chester and Wilson to sleep over. You have a nightlight? asked Chester. Of course, said Lily. I do too, said Chester. Same here, said Wilson. Chester and Wilson wanted toast with jam and peanut butter for breakfast the next morning. Boring, Lily said. Try this instead. This is good, said Chester. Wow, said Wilson. After that, when Lily asked Chester and Wilson to play, they said yes. And when she called them on the phone, they had pleasant conversations. And if Lily was walking on one side of the street, Chester and Wilson waved and ran to catch up with her. Chester and Wilson taught Lily hand signals, and Lily taught them how to pop wheelies. Lily taught Chester and Wilson how to talk backwards, and they taught her how to double knot her shoes. Some days I can't tell those 3 apart, said Lily's mother. Me neither, said Lily's father. Chester and Wilson and Lily and Wilson and Chester, that's the way it was. For Halloween, they dressed as 3 blind mice. For Christmas, Lily gave Chester and Wilson nifty disguises, and they bought her a box of multicolored shoelaces, extra long for double knotting. They loved to go on picnics. When Chester and Wilson told Lily about how they had each swallowed a watermelon seed once, Lily swallowed 3 of them. I will grow a watermelon plant for each of us, she said. In spring, Chester and Wilson and Lily shared the same umbrella. In winter, they never threw snowballs at each other. In fall, they raked leaves together. And in summer, they reminded each other to wear sunscreen so they wouldn't burn. Chester and Wilson and Lily, Lily and Wilson and Chester, that's just the way it was. And then Victor moved into the neighborhood. The end.
As we enter into a time of meditation, followed by silence, followed by the song Spirit of Life, I invite you to just take a moment and settle yourself into your body. Try to get comfortable within whatever that means to you. And maybe it means feeling your breath, moving in and out. Or maybe it means feeling your feet on the ground or your sit bones in the seat beneath you, grounding you, stabilizing you. Or maybe it means feeling the very top of your head, your crown, connecting you up into the air and all that is. Whatever it means to you, go ahead and take a moment. Do it now. Spirit of life and love, Holy One, of our being and our becoming, that which is sacred within, among, and beyond us. May we be present to the relationships that matter to us. May we show up for them and ourselves fully, intentionally, with love and compassion. May we learn to connect authentically across difference by maintaining a deep respect for the sacredness of life. And may our lives ripple out through relationships in love. May it be so, and amen.
I grew up in a household of marathon talkers. Everything was open for discussion. Everyone was responsible for their words. Language became the way that I perceived the world and the way that the world gained access to me. I studied several languages, and French was my college major, but unfortunately I'm no longer fluent. However, immersion in those symbolic systems shaped me and my perspectives. A family friend in diplomatic service spoke several languages fluently. He observed that one lives as many lives as the languages she speaks. What he meant was that every language expresses a different metaphor, and the speaker sees the world through that lens. Consequently, each language talks about the world differently. Relationships search for a common language. When my husband and I fell in love, our different languages were not immediately apparent. Like most lovers, we had a private language. We understood each other implicitly. In time, we became increasingly aware that each of us was looking out at the same world, but talking about it with different words. My perspective was most strongly influenced by language and the arts, his most strongly influenced by law and economics. At times, these views seemed to present obstacles that either had to be overcome or left standing as obstacles. Words were the best tool for overcoming them. After many years, I worked for my husband and his partners as an office manager and legal assistant. I observed the practical, unemotional logic that is not commonly applied to daily life. Law and economics do not always seem logical and rational to us, but within their own structures, their rules govern according to an internally defined logic. The analysis that takes place in the mind of a liberal economist has a way of knitting together the disciplines of the arts and sciences. It took me several years of observation, exposure, and argument to understand how these differences could partner. In my youth, the lively arts seemed to explain everything. Over time, I came to understand that the analytical approaches of economics and law were actually more inclusive and tolerant of a broader range of worldviews than the more subjective arts are. Those seemingly rigid disciplines could provide a structure that gives safe haven to the free flow of ideas and imagination. And so, like the man who said we live as many lives as the languages we speak, I came to recognize that each symbolic system, and maybe especially those I don't understand, has its own metaphor, which can broaden the world and our lives in it. My husband has been known to say the same thing, but in his own words, of course.
One of my loved ones uses the phrase, "Kennel up, pups," meaning, "Come here, fam." She's sometimes literally talking to canine members of her family, but she's also talking to her humans. The phrase means more than just gathering, though it's a phrase of familiarity and affection in which she means, "Come here, loved ones, let's be close and settle in together." After years of hearing her say, "Kennel up, pups," one day I asked her where she picked the phrase up, assuming that it came from an adult in her family who gathered her in that way when she was a child. Surprisingly, she told me it came from her childhood friend Jack's dad, and that he used to say it to the neighborhood kids, of which she was one. Now, I had never heard of Jack before, let alone Jack's dad. He was a peripheral friend in her life, and yet this little piece of Jack, this little piece of Jack's dad had traveled all the way through time and space as a phrase of affection, used many states and decades and humans later. The 2007 art piece, "The Castle," by Jorge Mendes is a single burnt red brick wall, 75 feet long and 13 feet high. Mendes built the wall without using mortar, simply stacking bricks on top of one another. Dead center in the middle of this 75-foot-long wall, the viewer can see that something has happened. As soon as you look at the colossal installation, you see it. The bricks in the middle of the wall, they arc. The wall curves up at its midpoint, making a small arch at the top, so the line where the red ends and sky begins bends. When you look more closely, you can see something at the bottom of the wall underneath the curve, a P in the wall's stacked mattresses. There beneath all of the stacked bricks, Mendes has placed a copy of Franz Kafka's novel, The Castle. This paperback book, a mere inch or so of words on delicate pages, affected the figure of the bricks. Kafka, the 20th century novelist whose work has been so influential that the term Kafkaesque has been coined to describe absurd or bizarre or nightmarishly surreal circumstances, was unknown during his lifetime. After his death, at age 40, from tuberculosis, Kafka's unpublished novels were bequeathed to his friend Max Bord with instructions to destroy them. Bord published them instead. Since then, the ideas in Kafka's novels have had a huge, if complicated, impact on the world. They're strong enough to have made Kafka a household name and Kafkaesque a household phrase. However, like Kafka's novels themselves, the meaning of that phrase is somewhat oblique, perhaps a bit curved. On the surface, with his wall, Mendes seems to be making a point about the power of the P underneath the mattresses, the ability of a novel, an idea, an action, a human life to ripple out through the world, bending even bricks. Our relationships are like that. They ripple out. One drop of love and care from Jack's dad ripples through distant relationships into families decades in the future, thousands of miles and moments and memories out from where they began. kindness multiplies exponentially, and love travels far beyond what we might imagine when we first drop it in to the world. But there is more than that in Mendes Blake's wall. He's also bringing together the intersecting forms of art, architecture in which he was trained, and literature. These forms are also in relationship with one another, and they ripple effects out through each other and the art piece and the world in their complexity. The novel, The Castle, does not have a clear cause and effect plot. Rather, it winds through characters and interactions with a frustratingly non-linear relationship between cause and effect. It challenges the very notion of the ripple, and yet there it is, a flimsy paperback beneath solid brick making waves in the art world. All is not as it seems. There is no mortar in this brick wall. Bricks are by their nature solid and strong, but these bricks bend and arch. They might move, they might fall. Louis Kahn, one of the 20th century's most influential architects, told his students they must respect the materials of architecture. He even advised them to have a conversation with a brick. You say to a brick, he said, "What do you want, brick?" And brick says to you, "I like an arch." And you say to brick, "Look, I want one too, but arches are expensive." And then you say, "What do you think of that, brick?" And brick says, "I like an arch." How are we related to one another? Is cause and effect obvious, or do relationships ripple unexpectedly? How do the differences in our forms, the differences in our symbols, the differences between and among us interact? In Audre Lorde's 1984 essay, "The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House," Lorde critiques universal feminism for subsuming difference. When difference is minimized, she argued, it is the culture and the reality of the most powerful that gets propagated as the universal. She writes that in order for us to be real in our relationships, quote, difference must not be merely tolerated, but seen as a fund of necessary polarities between which our creativity can spark, like a dialectic. Difference is that raw and powerful connection from which our personal power is forged. Last month, I had a deep conversation across difference with a friend and colleague I respect and admire, Cami Thomas, our former interim religious education coordinator who served our First Church congregation for a year in the religious education department between Beryl Ashenberg and the Reverend Kimberly Tomczyk Carlson. Cami, whose pronouns are they and them, made a big impact in our congregation the year that they served and continues to be in relationship with our First Church anti-racism team. Cami is a brilliant and kind leader and a powerful advocate for Black women's health in Milwaukee. Cami and I have learned a lot from each other over the years on topics ranging from the extraordinarily disproportionate Black infant mortality rate in Milwaukee to the history of Unitarian Universalist theology. We are different from each other, but we relate to each other with a deep respect and recognition, both of our differences and of our shared commitments to justice, transparency, and human dignity. Cami and I had different positions on the COVID vaccine. As I'm sure you've heard me say, my position is that the vaccine is the best tool we have to combat the coronavirus pandemic, and that therefore our faith calls us to use it, and masks and distancing, to limit the spread of this deadly virus and reduce its impacts, particularly on the most vulnerable among us. Cami's position is that everyone must have bodily autonomy, and that the Black community, particularly Black women, have no reason to trust either the government or the medical industry to be acting in their best interest, and thus need to be able to decide for themselves what is best for them vis-a-vis the vaccine. Months ago, Cami made the decision that they were not comfortable taking it. I reached out to Cami last month to have a conversation about an article I wanted to write about the vaccine and how patterns of power and oppression and history make a difference in people's relationship to and trust of the medical establishment and therefore the vaccine. I wanted to communicate my position about the vaccine being in line with Unitarian Universalist values, while still acknowledging how patterns of power affect people's choices. We met, we talked, we listened, we sat together by the lake and we laughed. I learned from Cami's experiences as a Black woman and a Black non-binary person whose primary work has been deconstructing years and decades and generations of abuse by both the medical establishment in the United States and the US government. They shared how trauma reverberates across generations in people's very bodies, and how that affects choices folks are making today about a vaccine coming from those establishments. I also shared where I was coming from, with the understanding that I have had a different experience with medicine and with power as a white woman, and because of that, I trust the vaccine more. I'm devastated by the death and the loss wrought by this pandemic, and so is Cami. We've both witnessed how the pandemic has moved through communities unequally because of the continued unequal distribution of power and resources, seeing it kill disproportionately more folks in Black and Brown communities. I said to Cami, that's why I believe taking the vaccine is in line with our UU principles, as well as masking and distancing, because it's the best tool we have to fight this deadly disease. It was a good conversation. I left it feeling confident that I could write honestly about my position while still honoring how historical trauma and oppression could cause someone to view it differently from me. About a week later, I got a text from Cami saying they really appreciated our conversation. They wrote to me that because of the conversation, they had been reflecting on their own principles as well as looking at the data, and they decided to get vaccinated. They wrote, now that I've gotten more information about the side effects both from COVID and the vaccine, I've decided it's the best tool I have personally against COVID, and I can mitigate my personal risk to receiving the vaccine. Sometimes we have to use part of a system we don't trust, they wrote, because it's the most effective tool available at the time. Relationships transform us. they also transform more than just us. They ripple out and transform the world through us. They end up kenneling up pups with love decades later. They end up bending bricks in community. They end up changing our minds and our hearts. They end up inviting larger groups into deeper, rippling understandings of complexity. Connecting across difference, including difference, and even changing as a result doesn't mean letting go of who you are or your principles. It means broadening yourself to include more perspectives and experiences of the world and being willing to change according to your principles as a result of knowing more. When Cami and I reflected later on our experience with each other, we both said we held on to the core principles we began with, but we also changed from listening to and learning from each other. Cami's critique of the racism in the larger systems out of which the vaccine came remains, as does their desire to have a larger conversation about human rights and public health. My commitment to public health and collective understandings of wellness remains, as does my desire to have a larger conversation about racism embedded in our institutions. And we added complexity to one another's principles such that Cami changed their individual choice about the vaccine, and I changed the way I understood how patterns of power affect individual choices about the vaccine. Connecting across difference does not have to mean either minimizing difference or stereotyping it. Difference can be patterned on one hand, and it can be individual on the other. It can be important, and it can be mutable. We can adhere to our principles, and we can change. What? Y'all, being a human being is complicated. In our worship associate's story this morning, Laurel is entirely capable of retaining her poetic, literary, sometimes romantic view of the world and also understanding the value and beauty of her husband's economic and legal and logical view of the world. She can even see how the different symbolic systems interact and complement one another rather than diametrically oppose one another. Art, architecture, literature, economics, law, logic, these forms can be in conversation with one another in a way that makes their meaning more complicated and therefore more true in its complex reflection of reality. Relationships transform us for the better when we treat them with reverence. They broaden our horizons and teach us about the greater wholeness of the world. We can pass on pieces of ourselves through one another, and we can gain pieces of the world through one another. French philosopher Simone Weil used the analogy of two prisoners separated by a brick wall, but they learn to use the wall to communicate with one another by tapping on it. Weil said, "This is what life is. Every separation is a link." Your life is linked with all of us and with everyone around you. You will make ripples in the world through every interaction you have, large and small. You will be even more powerful than a story beneath a stack of bricks, because you will be making ripples in tender flesh and even more tender spirits. So choose your actions intentionally. I know life is hard right now. Brokenness and suffering are everywhere. You don't have to fix it or be perfect in this messed up world. You only need to let love be what ripples out from you, your life ringing out reverence, reverberating through the jagged pieces of the world with wonder, respect, and awe. May it be so. And amen.
Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Let a dancing song be heard. Play the music, say the words, and fill the sky with sailing birds. Let it be a dance, let it be a dance, let it be a dance. Learn to follow, learn to lead. Feel the rhythm, feel the need. To reap the harvest, plant the seed. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Everybody turn and spin. Let your body learn to bend. And like a willow with a wind, let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. A child is born, the old must die. A time for joy, a time to cry. Take it as it passes by. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Morning star comes out at night. Without the dark there is no light. If nothing's wrong, then nothing's right. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let the sunshine, let it rain. Share the laughter, bear the pain. And round we go again. Let it be a dance.
Thank you all so much for your generosity. Pledges are at the core of our congregation's spiritual practice of generosity. We're also grateful for additional gifts to support our ministry, and we thank the folks out there who are appreciating this online ministry and are supporting it by either texting 73256 with the message "Give to" numeral UU, or by giving on our website, bit.ly/UU ways to give. Your gifts help us continue to provide this ministry. We also share the plate with an organization each month. In September, our Share the Plate partner is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which focuses on eliminating the loss of life from suicide through prevention programs, education on risk factors and warning signs, research and programs, and support for those who have lost someone to suicide. You can give to our Share the Plate partner through the same webpage at bit.ly/UUways2give. You can see all these options to donate on your screen now, and they will also live on in the YouTube comment section of this video after worship is over. So thank you so much for giving either right now or when you come back later to make sure you give to support these ministries. Your support keeps us and our community partners going. Thank you so much. Our closing words today are the poem Concerning the Book That Is the Body of the Beloved by Gregory Orr. The beloved moves through the world, is the world, becomes the 100 things we love or the one and only thing or person we love, shifting, restless, refusing to incarnate in a final form, as if to teach us to keep our eyes moving if we want to see the bird flitting from bush to tree. There it is. No, there. No, it's hidden now. You can't see it, but you can hear its song. May you hear its song today, First Church. Blessed be, and amen.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah.